Mistress denies the affair, but Millionaire's pregnant wife exposes her in public. She breaks down. A swirl of satin gowns, glittering chandeliers, and hushed whispers. This was supposed to be the highlight of the season. The Harrington Foundation's grand charity gala dazzled New York's elite, each arrival more spectacular than the last. Yet beneath the grandeur lay a troubling tension. Elizabeth Harrington, radiant in her advanced pregnancy, glided through the crowd with forced smiles. Meanwhile, Camilla Morgan, rumoured mistress to Elizabeth's billionaire husband, James Harrington, mingled confidently. Onlookers sensed the friction, but few dared speak it aloud. Tonight, a scandal was about to erupt in the most public of ways, and no one would remain unscathed. James Harrington was not just any billionaire. At 45, he was hailed as a financial prodigy, the kind who could wield the world's economic forces as effortlessly as a conductor leading an orchestra. Born to modest means in suburban Illinois, he had clawed his way to the top through a combination of relentless ambition, cunning deals, and a reputation for unflinching decisiveness. While he had not yet claimed a spot on the list of the 10 richest men in America, he was steadily climbing. He built his fortune in private equity, initially investing in struggling manufacturing companies and turning them around. After that, he expanded into tech startups, real estate, and even an exclusive venture capital fund that nurtured small but promising brands. Investors flocked to him chiefly because he demonstrated one consistency. He almost always won. Behind the glossy success stories, James valued secrecy. He was particular about where he lived, who he did business with, and what personal details were shared. It was precisely this aura of mystique that had first intrigued Elizabeth Bancroft, the graceful daughter of a prominent political family on the East Coast. She was bright, charming, and educated at an elite liberal arts college, majoring in art history but minoring in global economics, a combination that made her uniquely positioned in social circles that merged cultural sophistication with big money. They met in the most unremarkable of places, a fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Elizabeth had been volunteering, overseeing silent auction details. James had strolled in, exuding confidence, fresh from a business lunch. They locked eyes while standing near a display of Renaissance paintings. When Elizabeth asked if he enjoyed the exhibit, James only smiled. His reply was something to the effect that art was good business, and that he saw potential not just in the painting, but in the curator's approach. Elizabeth had teased him about being so financially minded, and James, intrigued by her wit, asked her to dinner. One date turned into 2, then 3. Before long, they were inseparable, forging a partnership that was more than romantic. Elizabeth's eye for detail, especially cultural nuance, gave James valuable insights in philanthropic endeavors and investments abroad. He appreciated her warmth, her unwavering support, and her unassailable composure in public. She, in turn, found his drive irresistible, drawn to the way he seemed capable of shaping the world around him to his vision. Their wedding was a grand affair at Elizabeth's family estate on the outskirts of Boston. Dignitaries, celebrities, and corporate magnates mingled under glittering lights. Photographs from the wedding spread across the society pages, capturing that timeless moment when the stoic James Harrington smiled genuinely as he kissed his bride. In the early years, they seemed unstoppable. The Harrington Foundation was born from their shared dream, a philanthropic arm dedicated to arts education, healthcare research, and youth development programs. James poured millions into it. Elizabeth curated events that garnered the attention of the global elite. Together, they were the new power couple, adored, envied, and unstoppable. Now, 7 years into their marriage, Elizabeth was pregnant with their first child. It was a development that warmed society's heart, turning them into a tabloid sensation. Headlines like "America's favorite couple expecting" dominated the paparazzi-laden websites. The once carefully guarded Harrington privacy was besieged by prying cameras and microphones. But James and Elizabeth were determined to remain composed. Behind closed doors, the pregnancy was a source of great joy and secret anxiety. James, who had thrived on controlling every aspect of his life, was unprepared for the emotional turbulence that came with a pregnant spouse. Elizabeth noticed changes in him. At night, he would stay up, pacing the floor of his study, murmuring about deals, expansions, and the future of their empire. She sensed that his drive to succeed had escalated to a kind of relentless mania, though she kept her concerns to herself. In the midst of this tension, new business opportunities arose. James took more risks, traveling, forging partnerships, and planning expansions that kept him away from home. Elizabeth tried to be understanding, chalking it up to his usual single-minded focus. Still, she couldn't ignore the constant pang of loneliness that crept in. She confided her worries to her close friend, Vanessa Green, who served as the Harrington Foundation's chief communications officer. Vanessa would reassure her that James was just being James, and eventually he would calm down once the baby arrived. Yet the seeds of doubt had already been planted. Whispers floated around the boardroom and the charity circles that maybe James's success streak had a new kind of impetus behind it. Maybe it wasn't just the baby on the way. Maybe there was another reason he was always away on business trips. Elizabeth dismissed those rumors as the typical gossip that surrounded a man of wealth. If there was a threat, she believed she would feel it, or, at the very least, see some sign. She was right. The signs did appear, but in ways she never anticipated. And thus began the unraveling of the perfect life she and James had so painstakingly built. Camilla Morgan had grown up on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina, in a modest neighborhood. Her father, Gregory Morgan, was a retired Army officer who ran a small security firm. Her mother had been a piano teacher who spent most of her days instructing local children. Camilla's early life was comfortable, yet always overshadowed by wealthier families in neighboring districts. Even as a child, she'd felt a longing for more money, more recognition, and certainly more glamour. A gifted student, Camilla excelled academically, and her parents invested in her future, sending her to a private high school on a scholarship. There she was introduced to a world of affluence and privilege that ignited a hunger she'd never felt before. She learned to dress, talk, and socialize like the wealthier girls in her class, though she didn't share their resources. After graduation, she secured a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York, where she studied marketing and public relations. New York City's glittering lights ignited her ambitions further, and she vowed never to return to a life of mediocrity. Upon graduating, Camilla landed an internship at Walters & Sons, an upscale investment consulting firm. It was there that she first heard about James Harrington, a frequent collaborator and friend of Edward Walters, the managing partner. James's name floated around the offices in hushed, reverent tones. He was the formidable billionaire with a Midas touch. Colleagues joked that if James Harrington merely hinted at a stock, it would soar. Camilla was captivated by his reputation long before she ever met him. She followed news articles about him, memorized details of his philanthropic endeavors, and even studied the business strategies he'd championed. She learned about Elizabeth Harrington through society pages, a poised, beautiful woman, pregnant with James's heir. That alone made Camilla grit her teeth with envy, for deep down she wanted to ascend to that realm of wealth and power. Fate intervened when Camilla transitioned from intern to full-time junior associate. She had enough charm, intelligence, and wit to navigate corporate minefields. She also had a cunning streak. Edward Walters noticed her potential for marketing campaigns directed at high-net-worth individuals. In a stroke of luck, or perhaps cunning design, she was assigned to coordinate a special pitch session for James Harrington's new venture capital arm. The meeting took place in a sleek, high-rise conference room overlooking Central Park. James arrived late, flanked by two advisors. The atmosphere shifted the moment he entered. It was as though gravity itself intensified. He barely glanced at Camilla at first. Midway through the presentation, however, Camilla stepped forward to explain a nuanced marketing strategy. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. She noticed James tilt his head, listening intently, then flick his eyes over her, appraising her intelligence, style, and presence. A short while later, James asked her a direct question, something technical, about demographic targeting. Camilla answered with practiced confidence. For the briefest moment, their eyes locked, and a small smirk formed at the corner of James's mouth. It wasn't quite flirtatious, but it was enough to send adrenaline coursing through Camilla's veins. After the meeting, James complimented her insight, and Camilla felt a triumph she had never before experienced. Over the following weeks, emails and phone calls increased. She'd check her inbox late at night, heart pounding, upon seeing his name pop up. "Could you run some numbers for me?" Or, "What's your take on this brand's market potential?" She responded quickly, always thorough, always impeccably polite. Even though the messages were strictly professional, a tone of familiarity began to creep in. Months passed in this manner. Camilla's star rose at Walters & Sons, and she found herself in more direct collaboration with James. Their conversations remained above board, but the intensity between them was palpable. Colleagues gossiped in hushed voices that Camilla might be the next big success story, someone poised to leap from a junior associate role to a major marketing position within a year or two. Then came the pivotal moment. James invited Camilla to a closed-door brainstorming session at a boutique hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Supposedly, they were there to strategize a marketing plan for a newly acquired tech startup. When she arrived, the lights were dim and an air of exclusivity hung in the room. James was alone, reviewing documents. He welcomed her, offered a seat, and they began discussing ideas. 40 minutes into the session, an electricity sparked. Camilla voiced an outlandish marketing angle for a new app. James looked at her with an intensity that caught her off guard. She never knew who made the first move. Perhaps it was both of them at once. They kissed, the pitch slides forgotten. In a blur of excitement, guilt, and forbidden exhilaration, Camilla entered a realm she had fantasized about for years. Afterward, they both promised it was an anomaly, a slip. They agreed it would never happen again. James insisted he was devoted to his wife, who was, after all, pregnant with his child. But, as is often the case with forbidden desires, once the line was crossed, it became easier to cross again. The clandestine meetings continued, each one cloaked in more secrecy than the last. Camilla convinced herself that she was merely playing a temporary role, and if all this served to propel her career, who was she to complain? Over time, however, her feelings deepened. She wanted more of James, of his world. The initial ruse of no emotional attachments dissolved into a swirl of longing, jealousy, and illusions. James found solace in the affair for reasons he wouldn't admit aloud. Perhaps it was the thrill of a new conquest, or the freedom to unburden himself from the weight of an impending fatherhood. He rationalized that Elizabeth was often emotionally distant, busy with the pregnancy, exhausted by philanthropic duties. Camilla offered a refreshing escape, a different spark. Their affair, however, was not as discreet as they liked to imagine. James's longtime driver, Marco, noticed how James's schedule revolved around private appointments. A junior accountant at Harrington Enterprises, Lily Kim, noticed suspicious expense reports, and people in James's entourage like Winston Keats, the Harrington Foundation's PR manager, were skilled at sniffing out trouble. Rumors floated, but they rarely reached Elizabeth's ears. Yet secrets have a way of surfacing. The affair gathered momentum, becoming a precarious tower of lies, ready to topple. And Camilla, determined to preserve her new life of comfort and stolen affection, would deny everything if pressed. Little did she know that Elizabeth Harrington, the poised and gentle soul, was on the verge of discovering a steel backbone, one that would shatter Camilla's illusions in the most public manner possible. In the weeks leading up to the charity gala, Elizabeth Harrington experienced a growing sense of unease. It began with small observations. James would return from business trips with an uncharacteristic glow on his face, or he would pick up phone calls in the middle of dinner, stepping outside with an apologetic smile. He would claim it was a crucial investor or an urgent matter only he could handle. Pregnancy had heightened Elizabeth's intuition. She told herself it was just hormones, that she was overthinking. Yet, a nagging voice in the back of her mind kept repeating that something was amiss. She tried to dismiss these worries, focusing instead on the upcoming gala, the baby's nursery, and her daily philanthropic work. But the stories she heard from her social circle fed those lingering doubts. An acquaintance, Madeline Brooks, who happened to be a trustee at the Harrington Foundation, mentioned, with a vague frown, that she'd spotted James dining privately with a young woman at a chic Italian restaurant in Soho. "Looked pretty cozy," Madeline said before rushing off, seemingly regretful she'd said anything at all. Elizabeth's best friend, Vanessa Green, laughed the rumor off. "James is always talking shop with potential partners. Don't read too much into it," she insisted. But Elizabeth could see an uncertain flicker in Vanessa's eyes. Was it possible that Vanessa, the family friend and communications officer, was also in the dark? Or was she simply trying to protect Elizabeth from further worry? The swirl of speculation grew darker when Winston Keats, the ever-watchful PR manager, advised Elizabeth to keep an eye on certain social media buzz. A shadowy blog post emerged, claiming that James Harrington had been seen checking into the same suite at a luxury hotel multiple times with a mysterious brunette. Elizabeth found herself compelled to search for this blog, something she would never normally do. The site was full of paparazzi, like rumors about celebrities and power players. No photograph accompanied the rumor about James, but the writer, identified only as NYC Insider, seemed certain of their information. Elizabeth confronted James one evening in their penthouse. She hadn't planned on it. She was simply too restless to pretend nothing was wrong. "James," she said calmly while they were seated on the sofa, the city lights glimmering behind them, "I've heard rumors about you with someone else." James sighed heavily, as though the question were an inevitable annoyance. "Elizabeth, the first in the public eye. People say all sorts of things. I meet with potential investors in hotels, restaurants. Where else are we supposed to do business? The rumor mill never stops." He reached out to hold her hand. "We're about to have our baby. You think I'd risk all that for some fling? Come on, Liz. Trust me." She wanted to trust him desperately. She nodded, accepting his explanation. That night, she told herself that the entire city thrived on gossip, that James's sincerity was genuine. After all, he was her husband, the father of her unborn child, the man who had never once broken a promise to her. Until now, or so it seemed. A few days later, Elizabeth received a phone call from a reporter named Rebecca Stewart, a family friend who worked for a local news station. Rebecca sounded tentative. "Liz, I don't want to alarm you, but I thought you should know. A source told me James is seeing someone else. I'm not running the story because I don't trust my source entirely, but these rumors won't die. Elizabeth felt her throat tighten. "Thanks for letting me know," she managed. She thought about confronting James again, but the memory of his reassurance and the sense that she might appear insecure or paranoid made her hold back. The seeds of suspicion, however, had taken root. Meanwhile, Camilla Morgan was enjoying the spoils of her hidden relationship. She had recently upgraded her studio apartment to a chic one-bedroom in a new downtown high-rise. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was far beyond what she could normally afford on her salary alone. She had also begun wearing designer clothes and carrying a luxury handbag that raised eyebrows among her co-workers. When asked about her sudden good fortune, she'd mention a successful side project or help from a family trust. Yet inside, Camilla was on edge. She knew she was treading dangerous waters. James had warned her numerous times that they needed to be more discreet. However, the more he pulled back, the more Camilla found herself desperate to hold on. She'd invested not just her hopes, but her heart. Being shut out while he wined and dined with Elizabeth at public functions stung her pride. She played the game anyway, figuring that if she held on long enough, James might come around to the idea of a life with her, a scenario she fantasized about more frequently than she cared to admit. The tension on all sides set the stage for the upcoming Harrington Foundation Gala. Billed as the society event of the year, it was intended to raise funds for children's arts programs. A constellation of VIPs, donors and celebrities planned to attend. Elizabeth was the lead organizer, devoting much of her time to ensuring every detail was perfect. James, of course, would be front and center, rubbing elbows with the wealthy donors. He hoped to woo into future ventures. Camilla received an invitation, courtesy of her firm's ties to Harrington Enterprises. She hesitated. Attending such a high-profile event, where Elizabeth would also be present, seemed a dangerous move. But not going might raise eyebrows among her bosses. And truth be told, part of her craved the thrill, the possibility of crossing paths with James. In a glamorous setting, the subtle nods they might exchange. She pictured herself in a stunning gown, momentarily capturing James's attention, even if she had to watch him at Elizabeth's side. A week before the gala, in a daring phone call, Camilla hinted that she would be there. James's reaction was ambivalent. "Keep a low profile," he instructed curtly. "We can't risk any scandal, especially now." That same day, Elizabeth's new personal assistant, Georgia Barnes, accidentally forwarded an email chain that reached Elizabeth's eyes. It contained an internal note from Winston Keats about a crisis management plan in case of rumored infidelities. Elizabeth felt her stomach lurch, reading the polite yet coded language that indicated the PR team was prepared for potential fallout. This was no mere rumor. Their own foundation's PR machinery was bracing for a scandal. Elizabeth confronted Winston. "Explain this," she demanded. Winston swallowed hard. "It's just routine, Miss S. Harrington. In a world where tabloids spin out of control, we need to be prepared. Especially with the stress Mr. Harrington is under. I swear we don't have any concrete proof of anything, just talk in the wind." Elizabeth told him she understood, but a glimmer of resolve flashed in her eyes. She was tired of feeling powerless. If there was something to expose, she would bring it into the light herself. The only question was how and whether she could handle the truth once she found it. The week leading up to the gala was a whirlwind of last-minute changes, confirmations from VIP guests, and behind-the-scenes negotiations. Elizabeth poured her energy into ensuring the event would be flawless. The gala would be held at an opulent ballroom in one of James's luxury hotels, the Regency Royale. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been poured into the decor alone, massive floral arrangements, custom lighting designs, and a stage set for live performances. Elizabeth's father, Senator William Bancroft, was slated to attend, giving the event an additional veneer of political importance. James used the opportunity to garner support from major donors for his philanthropic expansions. He saw the event as a perfect stage to fortify the Harrington name and, by extension, demonstrate stability and success, both in business and family life. In a parallel universe, Camilla busied herself selecting a gown and perfecting her look. She frequented high-end boutiques until she found the perfect fit, a midnight blue gown that clung to her figure, understated but undeniably elegant. She rationalized the expense as an investment in her professional image, though, truthfully, the purchase was driven by more personal motivations. She wanted James to see her in that dress and remember the dangerous spark between them. While finalizing her attire, Camilla's mind wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt uneasy about facing Elizabeth directly. Another part wanted to demonstrate she had nothing to hide. After all, in polite society, illusions were everything. If she appeared unruffled and confident, perhaps the swirling rumors would dissipate, or so she told herself. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was setting her own trap in plain sight. Subtle but telling details had come her way, a mention of hotel receipts from the Harrington corporate expense account, dinners at odd hours, intangible consulting fees. She was careful not to alert James or anyone else to her growing suspicions. Instead, she planned meticulously. She wanted evidence that no one, least of all the so-called Mistress, could deny. She arranged to have discreet security cameras placed in the staff-only corridors of the venue. Officially, this was a measure to prevent theft and ensure the safety of VIP guests, but Elizabeth had her own reasons. If Camilla tried to slink off somewhere private with James, or if anything suspicious happened, Elizabeth would capture it on film. Vanessa Green, who usually managed PR for the foundation, questioned the sudden need for extra surveillance. Elizabeth brushed it off with a tight smile and an explanation about increased security concerns with certain high-profile attendees. Vanessa didn't press further, but she sensed the tension rising in Elizabeth. Her friend seemed unusually detached, almost cold. As the gala drew closer, the Harrington penthouse transformed into a hive of activity. Stylists, event planners, and staff darted in and out, carrying bouquets, dresses, and accessories. Elizabeth kept her composure, sipping herbal tea to calm her frazzled nerves. She felt the baby move within her, an occasional flutter that reminded her what was truly at stake. This was no longer just about saving her reputation or her marriage. It was also about safeguarding the future of her child, who deserved a stable home. James, for his part, was a bundle of nerves but camouflaged it well. He reassured Elizabeth that everything would be perfect. "We'll blow them away with this event," he said, placing a hand protectively over her belly. "You've done an amazing job, Liz." His voice brimmed with pride, or at least the performance of it. Elizabeth returned his smile, allowing him the illusion that all was well. On the eve of the gala, Elizabeth received a tip, an anonymous text from a blocked number: "Watch the bar area and keep your phone ready." She read the message several times, wondering who could have sent it. She considered ignoring it, but every nerve in her body told her to heed the warning. Perhaps a sympathetic soul from James's circle was trying to help her. She saved the number in her phone under a single letter, X. That night, lying in bed, Elizabeth turned over the events of the past few months in her mind. She remembered their early love, how James had proposed on a moonlit terrace in Florence, how they had once shared nightly chats about everything from art to technology. Where had that James gone? Or had she been blind to his true nature all along? She closed her eyes, drifting into a restless sleep. In her dream, she saw herself standing in the center of the gala's ballroom. Everyone wore masks, elaborate, glittering disguises. James appeared, but when he lifted his mask, she saw only a blank space, like a phantom with no identity. She jolted awake in a cold sweat. Despite the turmoil, morning came. The sun rose over Manhattan, illuminating the city with a golden light that seemed to promise hope or perhaps reveal uncomfortable truths. Elizabeth dressed carefully for the day's pre-gala meetings and walk through. She wore a tailored navy suit that accented her pregnant form with understated elegance. Every step she took, she imagined the possibility of confrontation, the chance that tonight's event could shift her world irreparably. James left early to handle last-minute business. Elizabeth didn't ask where he was going. She felt a mix of relief and dread at his absence. After he departed, she found herself placing a protective hand over her belly. "I'll keep us safe," she whispered. "I promise." The stage was set for the evening's drama. Unbeknownst to most of the guests, they were about to witness not just a charitable extravaganza, but the unveiling of long-buried secrets. Elizabeth steeled herself for what was to come. She had orchestrated every detail for this moment, and now all she could do was wait. Night fell on New York, and the Regency Royale shimmered with promise. A deep red carpet stretched from the curb to the hotel's imposing entrance. Paparazzi bulbs flashed as limousines glided to a stop, their passengers stepping into view like celestial beings descending to earth. It was a spectacle of designer gowns, bespoke suits, and carefully choreographed poses. Inside, the ballroom glowed with warm, golden light. Towering arrangements of white orchids and roses lent an ethereal quality to the space. At one end, a stage awaited the evening's live entertainment, an acclaimed violinist followed by a renowned jazz singer. Elsewhere, bartenders offered top-shelf cocktails, while waitstaff discreetly circulated canapes. Elizabeth Harrington arrived in a luxurious black gown that hugged her pregnant figure elegantly. Delicate jewelry and a sleek updo completed her ensemble. She glided across the marble floors with a regal air, greeting donors, celebrities, and politicians with practiced warmth. No one could discern the turmoil brewing beneath her poised exterior. James joined her, resplendent in a tailored midnight tuxedo. Cameras snapped frantically when they appeared together, the perfect philanthropic power couple. At least, that was the image they portrayed to the world. Camilla Morgan arrived shortly thereafter. She chose to enter quietly, stepping from a taxi rather than a limousine to avoid undue attention. Nevertheless, heads turned. Her midnight blue gown caught the light, and her beauty glowed in the shimmering ambience. She told herself to remain calm and professional, greeting colleagues from Walters and Sons, shaking hands with acquaintances. She was determined to maintain the facade of an ambitious marketing associate here solely for business networking. The event progressed smoothly for the first hour. The violinist performed a hauntingly beautiful piece, drawing a standing ovation from the enraptured crowd. Afterward, Elizabeth took the stage to welcome everyone and thank them for their generosity, her voice measured and gracious. She was a natural in front of a microphone, radiating a confidence that belied her internal jitters. In the crowd, James caught Camilla's eye. She offered a subtle nod, the tension between them palpable, even at a distance. He made no move to approach her directly, mindful of the watchful eyes around him. Camilla felt a pang of longing, but also of anger, resentful that they had to hide. Resentful of Elizabeth's role as the beloved wife. Yet, she quickly reminded herself to keep her composure. As the evening wore on, Elizabeth mingled with donors, always keeping James within her peripheral vision. She also kept an eye on Camilla, though she did so discreetly. Camilla occasionally spoke with other guests, but Elizabeth noticed how the younger woman's gaze lingered on James. There was a familiarity there, a shared secret. When Elizabeth approached the bar to greet a group of potential funders, she glimpsed Camilla settling into a conversation with James's longtime friend and business partner, Edward Walters. They laughed politely about something, Camilla placing a hand lightly on Edward's arm, a social grace that seemed innocent enough. But Elizabeth could tell Camilla was scanning the room, waiting for James to be alone. A short time later, James excused himself from his circle of business associates, heading toward a corridor that led to a private lounge. Elizabeth watched as Camilla, noticing this, also slipped away from Edward and followed from a discreet distance. Elizabeth's heart hammered. This was the moment. She signaled to Winston Keats, who nodded and quietly walked away, presumably to alert the security team monitoring the cameras. Elizabeth approached a podium set off to one side of the ballroom. She tapped a microphone gently, drawing the attention of those gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "in a few moments, we'll have a special announcement. Please feel free to enjoy the music for now, and I'll be back shortly." Her cryptic words piqued curiosity among the guests. Some paused, wine glasses halfway to their lips, wondering what the wife of James Harrington was about to unveil. The tension in the air was tangible as Elizabeth stepped off stage and headed toward the staff hallway, carefully maneuvering through the throng. Meanwhile, James had stepped into the private lounge to take a phone call. Within seconds, Camilla slipped in behind him, closing the door. She feigned surprise. "Oh, I didn't realize you were here. It's quieter than the main room, isn't it?" James arched a brow, keeping his tone brisk. "Camilla, this isn't a good time." She shrugged, an attempt at nonchalance that belied the nervous energy quivering beneath her composure. "I just wanted to make sure everything was fine between us. You've been distant." James shot her a warning look. "We're at a public event with my wife. What do you expect me to do, put my arm around you and pose for pictures?" Camilla's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I know that, but you can't just shut me out. I need—" She stopped short as voices echoed in the hallway. Before either could react, the door opened. Elizabeth stood there, her chin held high. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes told them everything. This was the confrontation they had dreaded, and yet, in some twisted way, had invited upon themselves. James froze, phone still in his hand. Camilla's face blanched. The triad was complete, and for a moment, no one moved. The electric tension was thick enough to taste. Breaking the silence, Elizabeth spoke softly. "You're right, James. This is absolutely not a good time. But here we are." The air crackled with impending drama. And in that charged moment, neither James nor Camilla realized that hidden security cameras were capturing it all. The stage was set for a public reckoning, one that would unfold in front of the city's most influential eyes. Elizabeth's calm, measured tone sent a shiver through both James and Camilla. There was no hysterical outburst, no dramatic screaming. Instead, Elizabeth's cool gaze spoke of a far deeper resolve. She stood in the doorway, blocking any easy exit, her hand gracefully resting on the swell of her belly. James found his voice first. "Liz, this isn't what it looks like." Camilla shot him a fleeting look, her eyes begging him not to deny her entirely. But Elizabeth didn't need him to explain. She had suspected the affair long enough, and here was the culmination of her suspicions, two people alone in a private room, tension crackling in the air, confessions writ on their faces. In a soft, deliberate voice, Elizabeth addressed Camilla. "Do you deny that you and my husband have been seeing each other?" Camilla swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had always told herself she would lie if confronted. Deny, but the trap was sprung. She saw the determination in Elizabeth's eyes, the unspoken knowledge that no denial would hold weight. Still, she tried. "This is a misunderstanding, Mrs. Harrington. James and I," Elizabeth cut her off. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen the receipts, the hotel logs, the dinners. And you're here now, aren't you?" Her voice trembled slightly, but her posture remained regal. James stepped forward, attempting to stand between them. "Liz, we can talk about this somewhere private. This doesn't need to become a spectacle." Elizabeth leveled him with a stony gaze. "On the contrary, James, It's about time people see the truth. She reached into her clutch, pulling out her phone. A quick text to Winston Keats signaled the next step. Back in the ballroom, Winston discreetly signaled the AV technician, who then stepped on stage and halted the live jazz performance. The lights dimmed, capturing everyone's attention. Elizabeth turned on her heel and led the way out of the lounge, forcing James and Camilla to follow. They emerged into the ballroom, where hundreds of eyes immediately locked onto them. A hush fell over the crowd. The city's elite, robed in finery, waited in rapt anticipation. At the podium, Elizabeth raised a hand to hush the murmurs. James felt his chest tighten, aware that the entire night and possibly his entire empire was about to implode. Camilla's face went pale, realizing she was about to be exposed in front of society's most powerful figures. Elizabeth gestured to a large projection screen behind her. The guests collectively held their breath, expecting perhaps a heartwarming video about children's art programs. Instead, the screen flickered to life with security footage from just minutes ago, James and Camilla in the private lounge. Though the audio was faint, it was clear from their body language that they were more than colleagues. The entire room, friends, family, donors, and media could see the compromised position, the tension, and the guilt etched on James's face. Gasps rippled through the attendees. Cameras clicked and reporters whispered frantically into their phones. Edward Walters watched in horror, while Vanessa Green covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Senator Bancroft stood stone-faced, arms crossed tightly, as if bracing for an oncoming storm. Elizabeth's voice carried over the footage. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but it seems my husband has been conducting more than just business. I had hoped this was mere rumor, but sometimes the truth demands a stage." James turned to Elizabeth, whispering urgently, "For God's sake, Liz, let's stop this. Think about the foundation. Think about our child." Elizabeth's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "I am thinking about our child," she said, her voice trembling with contained fury. "That's precisely why I'm not allowing this charade to continue." Camilla, heart pounding, approached the podium in a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation. "Elizabeth, the first, I never wanted this to happen. It was a mistake. It just happened." Elizabeth lifted her chin. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Deny it if you want, but the evidence is right there. And you had plenty of opportunities to end it, to refuse. But you didn't." The crowd watched, transfixed. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable witnessing such a personal tragedy laid bare. Others leaned forward, morbidly fascinated by the public humiliation of one of the city's most powerful couples. Camilla, tears streaming down her cheeks, stood before the gathered elite. She could practically feel their judgment searing into her. Friends from Walters and Sons looked away in embarrassment. A few recognized that her career was likely over. In a trembling voice, she attempted to address the crowd. "I'm so sorry," James said. He said, "Don't," Elizabeth snapped. "Don't drag my husband's words into this, as though you were a victim. You knew he was married. You knew I was carrying his child." James tried to maintain composure, but his carefully curated public persona was crumbling. He stepped toward the microphone, voice hoarse. "Everyone, please. My wife is understandably upset, and this is a matter that should remain between us. I take full responsibility for my actions." Elizabeth swung her gaze to him, her voice taut with anger. "No, James, you don't get to hide behind closed doors anymore. Actions have consequences, and tonight you face them in the light of day." Winston Keats, ever the PR professional, considered intervening, but the scene was beyond salvage. The crowd was witnessing a raw, unscripted drama, perhaps the only genuine moment in a night otherwise devoted to polished facades. For a long, charged minute, no one spoke. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional click of a camera or a hushed whisper. Elizabeth let the moment stretch, ensuring everyone understood the gravity of the betrayal. Finally, she cleared her throat. We will make a formal statement about the future of the Harrington Foundation and our marriage in due time. For now, I can only say that I will continue to focus on our philanthropic work and on bringing our child into a world with honesty and dignity. She fixed James with a final, searing look, then turned her back to the audience. She walked out of the ballroom, footsteps echoing in the stunned stillness. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, letting her pass unchallenged. Behind her, James stared numbly as the woman he had loved and betrayed strode away with all the poise he had once admired. Camilla crumpled to her knees, overwhelmed by a wave of public scorn. The cameras captured every moment of her breakdown, immortalizing her tears for the tabloids and social media. Somewhere in the background, the band tried to resume a soft tune, but it fell on deaf ears. The night had descended into chaos, the central mission of the gala overshadowed by scandal. Yet, in the midst of heartbreak, Elizabeth had taken the reins of her destiny, refusing to be a victim of circumstance. And as James and Camilla stood amid the swirling storm of gossip and condemnation, they realized there would be no easy redemption. The truth was out, and everyone, friends, rivals, and strangers alike, had witnessed their downfall. The news spread like wildfire through the city and beyond. By morning, every major publication and gossip site led with the scandal. Millionaire's affair exposed at charity gala. The footage of Camilla's tear-stricken face and James's stunned expression looped incessantly on social media. Hashtags like #HarringtonScandal and #CamillaExposed trended, fueling endless commentary and memes. At the Harrington penthouse, Elizabeth spent the night in the guest suite, refusing to see James. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and her hands often strayed to her belly, as though reassuring herself the baby was still safe from the turmoil. She fielded calls from her family. Her father, Senator Bancroft, offered guarded support, but also warned of the political fallout. Vanessa Green came by in person, attempting to offer comfort. "Is there anything you need?" she asked softly. Elizabeth shook her head. "I just want some space," she murmured. "I need to figure out what to do next." Meanwhile, James holed up in his study, the door locked. He poured himself a whiskey, staring bleakly at the city lights. His phone buzzed non-stop. Investors, worried about the impact on Harrington Enterprises, tabloids offering to pay for exclusive statements, and personal friends wanting to know if the stories were true. He ignored most of the calls, responding only to Edward Walters. "We'll sort it out," he assured him. But the hollowness in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Camilla, on the other hand, found herself the target of widespread vitriol. She woke to hundreds of missed calls and messages from colleagues, ex-friends, even strangers hurling insults and threats. Her social media was flooded with condemnation. In a panic, she deleted her accounts, only to discover that the story had already been screen-captured and archived by gossip channels. She dared not go to the Walters & Sons office, having received an email that her presence might cause disruption. In an attempt to salvage her reputation, she tried reaching James, hoping he might at least offer some statement absolving her of blame. But her calls went straight to voicemail. In desperation, she texted him repeatedly, "I'm so sorry, please call me, we need to talk." There was no reply. The media frenzy peaked when a well-known morning show, Wake Up America, invited Rebecca Stewart, the reporter who had initially warned Elizabeth, to discuss the scandal. Rebecca kept her commentary measured, focusing on the philanthropic implications and the potential impact on the Harrington Foundation's beneficiaries. Still, the show's hosts reveled in the drama, recapping the public confrontation with theatrical shock and awe. Meanwhile, Winston Keats scrambled to manage the damage. He released a brief statement on behalf of Harrington Enterprises, acknowledging personal matters that had come to light, but emphasizing James's commitment to his business ventures. He also noted that Elizabeth Harrington would remain at the helm of the Foundation's day-to-day operations, ensuring continuity in charitable programs. Most journalists, however, wanted the juicy details, a timeline of the affair, proof of hush money, and personal statements from James and Camilla. Inside the penthouse, James finally emerged from his study, disheveled and red-eyed. He found Elizabeth in the kitchen, sipping chamomile tea, her gaze distant. "Liz, can we please talk?" he ventured. She placed her cup down, choosing her words carefully. "There's not much to say, James. You humiliated me. You lied to me." She looked away, tears threatening to surface again. "I have to think about our child now." He raked a hand through his hair. "I can't express how sorry I am. I know this doesn't make it right, but it was a mistake." A moment of weakness that spiraled out of control. Elizabeth let out a bitter laugh. "A moment? You've been carrying on for months. That's not a moment, James. That's a decision you made over and over again." "I know," he said, voice cracking. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. The chasm between them yawned wide, filled with betrayal and broken trust. Upstairs, Elizabeth retreated once more, locking herself away. She looked at old photographs of happier times, their engagement in Florence, their wedding in Boston, trips to Napa Valley and the Swiss Alps. Each image felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of what she believed. They had a bond that now lay in tatters. Meanwhile, an emergency board meeting convened at Harrington Enterprises. James attended via video conference. The board members expressed concern about potential hits to the company's stock and brand image. Some suggested James step down temporarily from his role as CEO until the scandal cooled. James bristled at the idea, but the writing on the wall was clear. His personal life had become a liability. Stranded in her apartment, Camilla wrestled with guilt, anger, and desperation. She'd lost her job, Walters. Sons had placed her on indefinite leave, a polite phrase that amounted to termination. She tried to call her father, Gregory Morgan, in Charleston, but the conversation was tense. He expressed disappointment and advised her to lie low, possibly even come back home. But Camilla was too mortified to face her parents in the aftermath of such a public debacle. With nowhere else to turn, she mustered the courage to venture out. Wearing sunglasses and a scarf, she hailed a taxi to a small, discreet cafe where she hoped no one would recognize her. Newsstands blared headlines about the Harrington scandal, each more salacious than the last. She could practically feel the stares of strangers on the street. As she sipped a lukewarm latte, a man in a dark suit approached her booth. "Camilla Morgan?" he asked quietly. Camilla looked up, startled, her heart pounded. "Who's asking?" He slid a card across the table. "Robert Jenkins Pye. I'm here on behalf of certain interests who want to know if you have any information that could prove damaging to James Harrington." Camilla froze. "Why would you think that?" Jenkins leaned closer, his voice low. "It's no secret you were involved with him. Now that it's public, there are parties, maybe even business rivals, who'd pay for inside details, documents, recordings, anything that can be leveraged against Harrington." She stared at him, incredulous. "I'm not selling out James. I need my life back." He shrugged. "Suit yourself, but consider this. Your bills won't stop coming just because you're out of a job." As he stood up, he left his card on the table. "If you change your mind, call me." Camilla felt sick. She realized she was indeed on a precipice. She could attempt to salvage her life by burying herself in anonymity, or she could cling to one final shred of the power she once wielded through her association with James. She wasn't sure which path was better. Back at the Harrington Foundation, Elizabeth spent the day with staff, ensuring that upcoming charity initiatives wouldn't be derailed by the scandal. She maintained her composure, but inside, she was crumbling. After a long meeting, she received a visitor's note from the front desk. "Camilla Morgan is here to see you." Elizabeth felt her pulse quicken. She toyed with the idea of sending Camilla away, but curiosity and a desire for closure overpowered her. She told the receptionist to let Camilla up. When the elevator doors opened, Camilla stepped out hesitantly, looking all too vulnerable. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her once immaculate hair disheveled. Elizabeth motioned her into an empty boardroom. The tension was thick. "What do you want?" Camilla swallowed. "I've lost everything. My job, my friends. People think I'm some kind of monster." She paused, voice shaking. "I'm not asking for your pity. I need to apologize. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "Sorry for sleeping with my husband? For deceiving me? For humiliating me in public?" Camilla's eyes filled with tears. "All of it. I wish I could go back and undo it." Elizabeth crossed her arms, feeling both anger and an unexpected pang of empathy. "Well, you can't. What's done is done." Camilla nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm leaving New York. I can't stay here anymore. I just wanted you to know that. I'm not going to fight you or go after James. There's no point." Elizabeth studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Slowly, she nodded. "I'm not asking you to ruin your life, but if you think I'll ever forgive you..." She trailed off. "It's not likely." Camilla lowered her gaze. "I understand, but I had to say it before I go." With that, she turned and walked out. Elizabeth stood alone in the boardroom, her emotions a swirling tempest. She found no comfort in Camilla's tears, yet a small part of her recognized that Camilla had also been caught in James's web of lies. The difference, of course, was that Camilla knew he was married all along. The city's appetite for scandal remained unquenched, and the Harrington name would be stained for years to come. Yet Elizabeth found herself at a crossroads, forced to decide whether to remain in the marriage for the sake of her unborn child or carve out a life on her own. In that moment, she resolved that no matter what the future held, she would emerge stronger. The foundation needed her child needed her, and perhaps most of all, she needed to reclaim her sense of self. The pieces of her shattered life lay at her feet, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope that she could rebuild them into something new, something honest. In the days that followed, Elizabeth maintained a delicate balance. She was still living under the same roof as James, but they occupied separate emotional spheres. He slept in the guest room, returning late at night after business meetings, presumably to stabilize the plummeting public image of Harrington Enterprises. Elizabeth, on the other hand, poured her energy into the foundation, ensuring that critical projects would not lose funding amid the negative publicity. Donors, surprisingly, rallied around Elizabeth. Many expressed sympathy, offering to continue or even increase their contributions if she stayed on as a leading figure. This show of support comforted Elizabeth. It reminded her that her own worth was not solely tied to James's reputation. A high-profile interview request came from American Profile, a reputable national publication. They wanted to feature Elizabeth's perspective on continuing philanthropic work despite personal adversity. Winston Keats encouraged her to accept. "It could be a way to show your strength and dedication," he reasoned. Elizabeth agreed, under the condition that the interview would focus primarily on the Foundation's programs. She was done with tabloid sensationalism. When the reporter arrived, Elizabeth spoke passionately about expanding the charity's arts initiatives and supporting underprivileged children. Naturally, questions about the scandal arose. Elizabeth kept her answers measured. "My personal life has indeed faced challenges," she said, "but my commitment to the foundation remains unwavering." Meanwhile, James found himself navigating a corporate firestorm. Some board members pushed for a formal separation of his personal life from company affairs. His phone calls with investors grew terse. "Look," he told them, "I made a mistake. It doesn't change my strategic vision for this company." yet he could sense their doubts, feel their coolness. Harrington Enterprises was a reflection of him, and right now that reflection was badly tarnished. One night, after a particularly tense board meeting, James returned to the penthouse. He found Elizabeth in the living room, laptop open, reviewing proposals for an upcoming scholarship program. She glanced up, expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, she gestured for him to sit. He sank into the chair opposite her. Silence hung in the air before Elizabeth spoke. "I'm consulting with an attorney about our options, financial arrangements, custody. I wanted you to know." James felt a jolt of panic, though he tried to hide it. "Custody? You're talking about—" She nodded, her gaze steady. "Our child. I'm not sure if I can stay in this marriage, James." He leaned forward, voice trembling. "Liz, I can't blame you for feeling that way. But before you make any decisions, please know that I do love you, and I will do anything to make this right." She closed her laptop, exhaling a shaky breath. "You can't make this right, James. What's done is done. Maybe we can reach a place of civility for the sake of the baby, but we can never go back." He lowered his head, tears threatening. For a man who had always prided himself on control, he now faced a situation he couldn't simply fix with a check or a deal. "If there's even the smallest chance we can rebuild, I'll wait. I'll prove to you every day that I can be better." Elizabeth studied him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. A part of her pitied him, but another part felt only the sting of betrayal. She reached out and placed a hand on his, more gesture than acceptance. "Time will tell," she said softly. The following morning, Elizabeth gathered her belongings and moved to her family's estate in Westchester County. The staff helped her pack, and James stood by, unable to find the right words as he watched her leave. She needed distance from the city, from the constant tabloid scrutiny, and most importantly, from the penthouse that had been the stage for too many secrets. Upstate, in the expansive tranquility of her family home, Elizabeth found a measure of peace. She walked through the gardens, letting the crisp autumn air clear her mind. Surrounded by memories of her childhood, she felt a glimmer of strength returning. Her mother, Catherine Bancroft, insisted that Elizabeth rest. "You're carrying precious cargo," she reminded her gently. "Don't let this scandal steal your health." Elizabeth allowed herself to slow down. She read books about parenting, listened to the baby's heartbeat during doctor visits, and started prenatal yoga classes. Each day, she felt more certain that she had made the right decision to step away from James, at least for now. From afar, she continued to guide the Harrington Foundation, relying on daily briefings from Vanessa and Winston. She participated via video calls for board meetings, her face calm but resolute on the screen. Meanwhile, the story about James's affair began to fade from immediate headlines, replaced by fresh scandals and the ever-churning cycle of news. Camilla had indeed left New York. Rumors circulated that she was back in Charleston, living quietly with her parents and avoiding the public eye. A few unscrupulous gossip sites speculated that she might write a tell-all book or sell her story to a tabloid, but nothing materialized. Some said she was too ashamed. Others believed she was simply done with the limelight. For James, each day without Elizabeth felt hollow. His business acumen remained intact, and he managed to quell immediate investor panic. But a deep loneliness accompanied him everywhere. The city that had once bowed to his will now felt cold and distant. Even the penthouse, spacious and luxurious, resembled a gilded prison. A small lifeline arrived in the form of therapy sessions. At Winston's urging, James sought help from a discreet counselor who specialized in high-profile marriages. It was there, on a couch in a quietly decorated room, that he admitted he'd never learned to handle vulnerability. "I always had to be the best, the most successful," he confessed. "I failed to see Elizabeth as my partner, not just an extension of my ambitions." The therapist encouraged him to write a letter to Elizabeth, not necessarily to send it, but as an exercise in honesty. James poured his regret and remorse onto the page, recounting the small details of their life. He cherished her warmth, her empathy, the way she read bedtime stories to him during sleepless nights. He wrote about his fear of fatherhood, his insecurity about being good enough. By the end, tears blurred his vision. In Westchester, Elizabeth also found solace in therapy. She met with an old family counselor, discussing the possibilities for her future. She considered the impact of divorce, of co-parenting, of a life without James. But the counselor also guided her to remember the times when James had been a loving, supportive partner. The counselor suggested that Elizabeth not make any final decisions until after the baby's birth, giving herself emotional space to heal and reflect. So a delicate balancing act ensued. Elizabeth devoted herself to preparing for motherhood, leaning on her family and close friends. James worked tirelessly to rebuild his moral and emotional core, hoping that one day Elizabeth might see him as worthy again. Far from the city lights, a new sense of purpose dawned on Elizabeth. Perhaps the baby's arrival would bring clarity. Until then, she would remain steadfast, forging her path one step at a time. Whether James would join her on that path or remain a distant figure in her child's life was a question only time could answer. Winter settled across the East Coast, dusting the Westchester estate's sprawling lawns with a gentle white cover. Inside, Elizabeth Harrington found herself in the final weeks of her pregnancy, a serene glow replacing the earlier tension that had consumed her life. Surrounded by her mother and a handful of supportive staff, she felt safe. Each day, she managed foundation affairs via video calls, scheduling philanthropic updates for after the baby's birth. Donors understood, many reached out with heartfelt wishes, extolling Elizabeth's strength through adversity. It felt good to be recognized, not as James Harrington's wife, but as an individual capable of steering her own destiny. Meanwhile, James made steady progress in therapy. He wrote letters to Elizabeth regularly, though he mailed only a fraction of them. In these letters, he confessed his own vulnerabilities, the pressures he faced, the mistakes he made, and the longing he felt to be part of his child's life. Elizabeth received the letters with a cautious heart. She read them, sometimes allowing tears to fall, but refrained from responding in depth. She needed to see more than words. She needed consistent actions, proving James's transformation was genuine. In late January, a snowstorm raged outside when Elizabeth went into labor. She was rushed to a private wing at a local hospital, accompanied by her mother and sister. The hours of labor were intense, but Elizabeth clung to a single thought. She was bringing new life into the world, a life she would love unconditionally. As she breathed through the contractions, she was surprised when the door to her hospital room swung open, revealing James. Her family had called him at the last moment, respecting that he was the father. He stood hesitant, soaked in melted snow, face drawn with concern. "Liz," he said softly, approaching her bed, "I'm here, if you'll let me be." In the flurry of pain and emotion, Elizabeth nodded. She didn't have the energy for a grand confrontation. In that pivotal moment, James was simply the father of her child, and his presence felt necessary. He gripped her hand, whispering words of encouragement as the contractions grew more frequent. After many agonizing hours, Elizabeth gave birth to a baby boy, whom she named Henry James Harrington. The moment the newborn's cries filled the room, a wave of love and relief washed over her. James, tears streaking down his cheeks, gently held the tiny infant. Their eyes met, sharing a moment that transcended betrayal, heartbreak, and anger. Later, as Elizabeth rested, James stood by the window, holding Henry in his arms. Snow fell in soft flurries against the glass. His heart brimmed with awe and responsibility. He whispered to his son, "I promise you, I'll do better." The days that followed were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Elizabeth allowed James to stay in the guest room at the estate, giving him the opportunity to bond with Henry. She observed him, seeing a gentler side emerge, a man humbled by life's circumstances, determined to be a father. Their relationship remained on uncertain ground. Elizabeth was not prepared to declare absolution, yet she appreciated James's efforts. Slowly, they found a tentative rhythm, united by their devotion to Henry. Counselors recommended they proceed cautiously, focusing on co-parenting first. If reconciliation is to happen, one therapist said, let it grow naturally out of mutual respect and emotional safety. Far from the estate, the scandal had largely receded from public attention. Some tabloids still peddled sensational updates, but a new wave of celebrity gossip took center stage. Camilla Morgan's name seldom surfaced anymore. She remained out of sight, presumably in Charleston. Harrington Enterprises stabilized under James's careful oversight, though the board continued to watch him closely. Weeks turned into months, and Henry blossomed into a chubby, curious infant. His laughter filled the estate's halls, bringing warmth even on the coldest days. Elizabeth discovered a well of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She also discovered a softened corner of her heart that remembered why she had fallen in love with James in the first place. One evening, as she rocked Henry to sleep, James approached quietly. "Hey," he whispered. "Can I take over for a while?" Elizabeth nodded, passing the baby to him. She watched as James gently hummed a lullaby, eyes brimming with tenderness. In that moment, she saw not the powerful billionaire or the unfaithful husband, but simply a father cherishing his child. They spent the night talking in hushed voices, sipping tea in the living room after Henry was asleep. James spoke of the changes he'd made, therapy sessions, restructured business priorities, philanthropic expansions that placed Elizabeth at the forefront of decision-making. He apologized again for the pain he caused, reiterating he would accept whatever role Elizabeth allowed him to have in her life. Elizabeth listened, her guard slowly lowering. The journey of betrayal was far from over, but a new path seemed possible, one forged through accountability, honesty, and a shared love for their son. She didn't promise a renewed marriage. That would require time, trust, and possibly more heartbreak. But she acknowledged James's efforts, allowing a flicker of hope to guide her. In the following months, Elizabeth resumed an active role at the Harrington Foundation, championing new grants for arts education. At her side, James offered support, mindful to respect her leadership. They released a joint statement announcing Henry's birth and reaffirming their commitment to philanthropy. Publicly, they were cordial partners. Privately, they began the slow, fragile work of healing. Life would never be exactly as it was before the affair. The memory of that public humiliation, of Camilla's tears and Elizabeth's fury, remained a cautionary tale. Yet adversity had also unlocked growth. James, once invincible in his own mind, discovered the power of vulnerability and humility. Elizabeth, who once saw herself as merely part of the Harrington brand, emerged as a formidable, independent figure, respected and admired in her own right. Over time, the mansion in Westchester rang with a different melody, one of late-night feedings, tender family gatherings, and cautious but genuine attempts at rebuilding trust. Neither James nor Elizabeth knew how their story would ultimately end, but for now, they had found a new beginning, united by the tiny life they had brought into the world. In that way, the scandal had forged a second chance, painful, messy, but also laced with the promise of transformation. And as Elizabeth rocked Henry in her arms each night, she reminded herself that even the darkest chapters could lead to the dawn of possibilities yet unimagined. Scandals may explode in public, but real resolutions take shape behind closed doors. In this story, Elizabeth discovered a fierce sense of self-worth, refusing to let betrayal define her or her unborn child's future. James confronted the emptiness beneath his power and influence, struggling to rebuild trust on a foundation he had nearly destroyed. Camilla left the city in tears, carrying with her the lessons of a costly mistake that would forever change her life's course. Yet from the wreckage sprang a second chance, a child who became the common ground for a broken marriage and a catalyst for personal growth. Betrayal was the spark that ignited everything, but love, whether for a partner or for an innocent child, proved it could still endure in new forms. If this riveting saga kept you on the edge of your seat, show your support by hitting the like button, sharing with friends, and subscribing for more dramatic, real-life fiction. Your engagement fuels new stories and the truth they reveal.